if Donald Trump was really aiming for trade deals, why would he have put these tariffs on like 100 countries all at once?
I don't know. I can't say. I can't. I'm not a. You know.
Do you think it's reasonable for me to think that it's probably just because Donald Trump thought that these tariffs would bring back manufacturing and he just didn't know any better?
I mean, maybe I could see how that would be an assumption. You know, maybe, possibly, but.
If you want to see more content like this, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Rinyald. And if you disagree with anything in the video, make sure you join the Discord and we can have a chat sometime.
I don't really know. I don't really support him fully, but I think he's a little better than the other candidate.
Sure. All right, what do you think he's done that makes him a good president?
Tariffs, the whole tariffs deal. I think that's pretty good for the economy.
Why do you think so?
Well, because it's putting money back into America. You know what I mean?
At the cost of industry, yeah.
Questionable.
So, like, what do you think? What do you think the goal of the tariffs were? Do you think they were like for money making? Do you think they were to bring manufacturing back, or do you think they were for trade deals?
Both. I think it was to make money, and then also keep money here. You know what I mean?
Do you understand that it can't be all of those at the same time? If they were there to make money, then why would you negotiate any trade deal?
You know, it can be kind of like beef. You know, exporting beef and importing beef. There's money to be made there.
The question I'm asking is, if you're putting high tariffs on countries in order to make a lot of money for the federal government, why would you negotiate a trade deal to bring those tariffs back down?
I can't really say. I can't really speak on that because I don't know fully about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I appreciate you giving that answer. That's probably the best answer that you could have given.
You know, I'm not gonna sit here and
I greatly appreciate that.
And preach on stuff that I have no idea. You know, that I'm not 100% sure on, but
I appreciate that.
But you know, and I'm not trying to sit here and tell you that you're wrong about anything, or that, you know, or trash you or anything. But
there's a saying that says like, the more you know that you don't know. It's a really, really good sign of intelligence to be able to know where your level of expertise is and not speak on something that you don't know a lot on. So I appreciate that you say something like that. It makes me respect you a lot more than a lot of the Trump supporters that I talk to.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I'm not trying to disrespect anybody. I see a lot of that, and I don't stand for that, you know, at all. When some people,
considering the last guy told me that he hopes my family goes to a torture camp. I wouldn't wish that on anybody ever for any reason. So, okay. The reason that I asked you that question, though, is because when Donald Trump said that he is putting these tariffs in place, it feels like the aim of these tariffs is ever shifting depending on, you know, how he can justify putting the tariffs on. So if he says like, oh yeah, I'm putting these tariffs on so we can bring manufacturing jobs back, and then that doesn't work, he says, oh, well, I'm actually just putting these tariffs on so we can negotiate trade deals. And then if that doesn't work, he says, okay, well, I'm actually just putting them on so we can raise revenue. And he shifts between these three justifications depending on which one it's more convenient to use. When the answer as to why he's putting these tariffs on is probably just because he doesn't really understand how the tariffs work super well, and he just has these misconceptions about what tariffs actually do, even though on all three of those, except for making money for the government, because it necessarily does that, he just seems like super misguided.
Okay, so you gave me a situation where you just think maybe he doesn't know what's going on, or or maybe it didn't work out, so he's changing. But I'm going to give you a scenario, because I would like to think that I do know what I'm talking about on this. So U.S. beef imports and exports. So U.S. beef is the most valuable beef in the world. Do you see what I'm saying? Would you agree? I'm not saying would you agree, but
U.S. beef is
it's a fact.
like we have the best beef. Maybe.
Yes, that's correct. So is what's going on with that? Because I'm going to speak on that because that's what I know about.
Mm-hmm.
So we're exporting beef, you know, to other countries, and we're importing their beefs.
Mm-hmm.
So there's lower tariffs on that, and the reason for that is because we're selling our beef for more money than what we're importing beef for.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be like if you okay, so it'd be like if you had a lemonade stand and your neighbor had a lemonade stand,
Mm-hmm.
and you would go to your neighbor and say, "Hey, I'm gonna," and you were selling all your lemonade for much more money, but you needed lemonade for yourself too at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be like you selling lemonade at a higher price to everybody else, including these people that you're getting it from,
Mm-hmm.
and then saying, "Hey, I'll do you a favor, and let's I'll take it easy on you getting that lemonade over to me, and then selling, or keeping that lemonade that you're buying cheaper for yourself."
Sure. Yeah. I
Because
think what you're
the
explaining.
the,
I think what you're explaining
the
is just like securing trade deals, and I think that is a good thing. I obviously agree that that's a good thing, but I don't think the kind of tariffs that Donald Trump put in place was the most effective way to get new trade deals.
well, what would you think would be the most effective way?
So I mean, there's a couple ways that you could do it. I would generally say that if you're trying to secure specific trade deals with specific countries, a blanket tariff like what we saw on Liberation Day is just kind of creating unnecessary bad effects. When you could and should just be using way more tailored to specific countries kind of tariffs in order to negotiate these kind of trade deals. The second thing is I don't understand why we would need to put a trade deal on a particular country in order to get them to come to the negotiating table with the U.S. because we're the U.S. We're the biggest market in the world. Every country has every incentive to come to the table to lower tariffs with the U.S. I don't understand why we would need to start that with an aggressive act.
Yeah. Well, see, and I think there's a lot that goes on that we don't know about or that's not covered. You know what I mean? So I think there's a lot more that goes into it that the common person isn't, educated on or
Mm-hmm.
doesn't even know about, or there's just a lot more that goes into it. So, um,
Sure, but I mean, like when
and
we're
also at the same time,
well,
at the same
real quick,
time, I believe that.
before we
Yep,
move
go ahead.
on, before we move on, I would say that in addition to this, if you're trying to put these tariffs on to negotiate trade deals, and it doesn't work, like your tariff is perceived as too aggressive, you also end up killing the idea of a trade deal dead in the water. I mean, look at the strategy with Canada right now. We started off with huge tariffs trying to get them to come to the table to renegotiate a trade deal, and they ended up saying that they're going to cut a lot of their U.S. exports. Period. So we're losing the amount of export that we have to that country. I'm pretty sure that they said that they're planning on killing a lot of imports to the U.S. as well. So we're going to be losing a lot of oil from Canada because we get a lot from Canada. Like this kind of hyper aggressive strategy in order to get people to come to the table also like kills a lot of the prospects when it comes to further trade deals as well.
In the short term, I agree with you. Maybe in the short term, um, in the long term, I think it's. I would say it's probably a good deal because other countries realistically cannot, you know, can't thrive without America or without importing to America, or I shouldn't say they can't survive, but America importing to America is a huge asset
Yeah,
to
sure.
everybody.
Hmm. I agree,
So I
but
think if they want to per se pout for now, oh, I'm not going to do that. I think it'll take a toll on their economy, and then hey,
yeah, I
maybe in a
agree.
year, 2 years down the road, oh shit, maybe we need to rethink this.
I agree,
this
but
deal.
all I'm saying is that it feels like it would be a lot more effective to try and do this diplomatically rather than doing like starting it off with a hyper aggressive act that's going to sour our relationship with a lot of other countries. Why wouldn't we just do this the diplomacy route first?
It also just hurts Americans to stop getting this cheap stuff imported. Like it just makes things more expensive for the American people.
That's true as well. But I mean,
Again, for the short term, yes, but I think in the long run, it'll
like okay,
be
so
in America's best interest.
I
You know what
agree that like
I could
these
be wrong too.
I agree with
you know.
these I agree that these aggressive acts can result in trade deals that are good for America. I agree. But the problem is that I don't think that's the most effective way to do it. So like if I'm trying to get a candy bar from the store, I could say that the best way to do it is to exchange my money to buy the candy bar, but then it feels like what Trump is doing is like, okay, well, let's just rob the convenience store and get the candy bar and then worry about the bad side effects later. Like, why
I
not
could
just buy
see
it?
that. Yeah. Yeah, I don't. I mean, maybe.
I mean, what is even expected in the long term? What are you expecting to get to achieve?
What's that?
What is expected in the long term? Like what are we gaining in the long term?
Better deals with tariffs. I feel like these countries that don't want to do this right now or trade because of tariffs, it's going to affect their economy, and then they're going to come back, or later on down the road, we're going to have better deals.
That just doesn't seem like it's gonna happen like at all.
Maybe not.
We're not
It
seeing too much
can like
movement
it
here.
has the potential
I'm
to,
sure.
but
I'm sure somebody a lot smarter than me has sat down and thought about it or ran numbers. You know what I mean? But I could be wrong too. So
it seems like right now it does feel like some countries are going to land on a trade deal with the U.S. The problem is that if Donald Trump was aiming to do trade deals with the entire world all at once, that feels a little silly, right? like if Donald Trump was really aiming for trade deals, why would he have put these tariffs on like 100 countries all at once?
I don't know. I can't say. I can't. I'm not a.
Do you think it's reasonable for me to think that it's probably just because Donald Trump thought that these tariffs would bring back manufacturing and he just didn't know any better?
I mean, maybe I could see how that would be an assumption. Maybe possibly, but
Okay.
I again, I'm not 100% sure, so I don't know.
Okay.
Why do you think that he's a bad president for that?
I don't. I think the tariffs are really stupid, but I like the tariffs aren't the reason why I think he's necessarily a bad president. I think it contributes to him being a bad president. But I don't think that like. Well, I don't know. If there was a president that wasn't Donald Trump that tried to pursue the tariffs like this, I don't know if I would consider them a bad president just on the back of that. I'd have to think about it. But luckily, there's like 5 or 6 different other issues that Donald Trump is like really, really, really terrible on.
What could I hear those, or could I hear your opinion on those? Why do
Yeah.
you think? What are some of your other
Yeah,
big
so
points?
I think the way that Donald Trump is conducting our immigration and immigration enforcement is basically trying to, do the hardest crackdown that we possibly can using like bad faith declarations of emergency power instead of actually doing like a real long-term solution to the border, which would have to be done by Congress, but it just feels too long. So he wants to do like these super hard crackdowns. And in a lot of the situations, I feel like the super hard crackdowns are pretty immoral. And a lot of the stuff that is happening because of these crackdowns and how quick he's trying to do the crackdowns without looking into any of the repercussions has been really, really, really bad for America's image. I think that he has a pretty flagrant disregard for anything that the Constitution tells him to do, and he's kind of willing to go around it if he thinks that it gets in his way. The president is there to uphold the Constitution, but I feel like Donald Trump more so views the Constitution as an obstacle in getting his agenda through, which I think is a really, really big problem. this kind of goes hand in hand, but there's this thing called a unitary executive theory where Donald Trump is basically just aiming to centralize as much power into the president as he can and try and make it as unaccountable as possible, which I think is a really, really bad thing, and really, really scary when it comes to our system as, checks and balances. I think Doge was a pretty bad failure. I think that his divisiveness has led to a lot of problems, even within his own base when it comes to Elon Musk. Um, I think the Big Beautiful Bill was just huge deficit spending for somebody who ran on fixing the deficit, or fixing our deficits. I think that his campaign was pretty dead in the water for me right off the get-go, because I think January 6th was really, really bad and maybe disqualifying. I think that he's a bad person. There's a lot.
Yeah. Okay. So you talked about immigration.
Yeah.
What do you think is terrible about this immigration situation?
So, a lot of the deportations that he was doing was done through an executive order or through executive orders using emergency powers, and I'm inherently pretty skeptical of the president doing like invocations of emergency powers during peacetime. I really don't like that. And a lot of the deportations that he was doing with these emergency powers were in furtherance of robbing immigrants of their due process rights. And what ended up happening is we sent people to this prison in El Salvador called CCOT, and we're getting, which has a history of torturing the inmates, and now we're getting reports that they were torturing the inmates who didn't have the due process rights to challenge their deportation through any body outside of just saying that they're not deportable. That kind of led to cases like what we saw from Kilmar Abrego Garcia, where he had a withholding order saying that he couldn't be deported to El Salvador, but because they wanted to move so quickly, they ended up deporting him to El Salvador anyway, to that prison where he was tortured.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of think like there's going to be bad everywhere.
Mhm.
No matter what happens or what's going on, there's going to be bad. You know what I mean? Unfortunately, that's terrible to say or a terrible way to think, but that's the way the world is,
Mhm.
in my opinion. Do you believe in borders?
Yeah.
Right. So do I.
And I honestly think there is a problem with our border right now, but I think that that Donald Trump's solution of just super hard cracking down on illegal immigration and using emergency powers to temporarily shut the border down instead of actually pursuing any sort of change through Congress that can't just be overturned by another executive order, I think is just Band-Aid solutions. I think that the problem at the border requires legislation, and Donald Trump is not interested in doing legislation because it's too slow.
Right. I can see how what's going on with the mass deportation and stuff. I can see how that's not very, I can see why people are upset with it and don't think it's right. But at the same time, if I had a bunch of people in my house that I didn't want in my house and that shouldn't be in my house, I would also like to say, get the fuck out of my house, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. And
It's wrong. Is there really any right way of kicking somebody out of a country? You know what I mean?
Absolutely. There absolutely is. I mean, we saw really big deportation efforts by the Biden administration. Now, obviously, it was kind of overwhelmed because we were also seeing record high crossings, so that was kind of overwhelmed. But they did a lot to remove a lot of illegal immigrants from our country. As gets brought up a lot, Obama removed a lot of people in a legal way, even through an expedited process. He just followed the actual statutes that tell him his power in regard to removing people, whereas Donald Trump is, I would say, doing it illegally a lot of the time,
But you
and
could
doing
say
it
that.
through
You
like
could say
states
that
of national emergency, which again, like it's peacetime. I don't understand how we could declare, states of national emergency when we're not at war. We don't have any super bad economic factors right now. Our crime rates aren't up significantly. There's not like a global health emergency going on.
but also I think it is kind of an emergency. What's going on the southern border? How many people? What was it? 10 or 12,000 people a day crossing? Um,
Well, I think it was
that's
10,000 people encountered. That doesn't necessarily mean crossings, but I mean I don't necessarily like if it's not manifesting into a real problem, then I don't think that we should be declaring a state of national emergency. Like I would understand if like the economy was taking a huge hit or our crime rates were up super high or something like that, but there's not really any indication that our country's in a state of national emergency.
I don't know. I would have to disagree on that. I think that let's just say 10,000 people. I think 10,000 people coming into America illegally every day, that is an emergency, or that's a pretty,
Well, they weren't like that
appalling.
number. That number doesn't indicate that like tens of thousands of people were coming into the country every day. An encounter just means Border Patrol found somebody. Encounters include turnaways. So if you were found at the border and turned away, that's included as a border encounter.
Okay, but how many people are not encountered? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
I agree with that, but the problem is that the actual ability to estimate how many illegal immigrants snuck past Border Patrol is really really difficult because you can't know what you don't know. Like I don't know how many people have snuck into my room at midnight and sniffed my hair because like I wasn't awake. I have no way to know that. Like I have no way to know who snuck past our our
right. No,
officers.
I see what you're saying, but I don't know. I just think people that are coming here illegally and living illegally and working illegally or for money under the table, I just think that's I think that's wrong. I do.
And
Um,
we could have that kind of conversation, but before we have that conversation, I think there needs to be something to be done to actually fix the problem at the border to prevent people from being incentivized to do it, and B, I think we need to make sure that the president is going to go about removing these people in a legal way before we have the conversation of whether or not illegal immigration is good or not, or whether or not we should have amnesty. At the very least, I just want the president to follow the Constitution, and I want any actual solution to the border to be pursued. But the problem is that Donald Trump is failing on those two very, very baseline things in terms of immigration.
yeah. Yeah, I don't know. There's good and bad in it. I see both. But at the end of at the very end of it, at looking at the big picture,
Mhm.
I don't think I would say that what's happening is a bad thing. I mean, don't get me wrong. If I was an illegal immigrant, I would say, "Oh fuck, this is the worst thing that could happen." But
Well,
I'm not.
so these kind of deportations cost a lot of money, right? Like in order to fund ICE enough to have enough officers to have the place to store all of the people that are in detention, to pay these foreign countries to hold these people, it costs a lot of money to get rid of these people. Um, like that's a pretty demonstrable harm that everybody faces by these mass deportations is that there's a really really high governmental cost for this. I'm pretty sure they just upped ICE funding 3 times, something like that. So when we're talking about like lowering the debt, but we're also like tripling ICE's budget, that's something that affects like everyday Americans, right?
Right. I mean, yeah, it does cost money to get to deport these people, but what are you losing from these people being here?
Economic activity
Not
for
paying
one thing.
taxes.
You're
What's
losing
that?
economic activity for one thing. You're losing local taxes being paid by illegal immigrants for one thing. Um, and also this is a more abstract thing that a lot of people don't perceive, but you're also losing some of your uh constitutional rights. I mean, if we're getting rid of these people by violating their due process rights, then that's removing the barrier that says like under no circumstances can the president violate due process rights. If we start to normalize that we can violate these rights, then that never just gets isolated to one group of people. The reason that they started with illegal immigrants is because a lot of people are too afraid to defend the rights of people that some people view as kind of unsavory. But I mean, constitutional rights are constitutional rights. And I think that it's fair to say that we should set a hard line and say if the president is violating people's constitutional rights, then that's an unequivocally bad thing, and that we should not support the person that's doing that. I feel like that's a pretty understandable line to draw.
But are people that aren't citizens, do they have rights? You know what I mean? Do you go to
Yes.
somewhere in the Middle East or somewhere in
Yes,
Antarctica or somewhere in Japan?
People who are
Can you
not
go there and
citizens
say
of the United States,
you have
absolutely.
constitutional rights?
So you acknowledge that if there's an illegal person over in the United States, that Border Patrol couldn't just shoot them, right?
I agree. Yeah.
And that's because of the rights that are given to them through the Constitution. They have the right to process. They have the right against cruel and unusual punishment. So it's the same thing. Like, the reason that we can't just kill them all is because they have certain rights enshrined to them through the Constitution.
Okay. Well, yeah. At the same time, I think that that's just a terrible. That's not a solution to anything. I don't think anybody anywhere in the world.
Yeah, sure. But
that would be an answer. But
I agree, but that's just to illustrate that, like, that's to illustrate that we can't just treat them any way that we want to. The Constitution enshrines certain rights for certain people, and the Constitution enshrined the rights for illegal immigrants that you should, under regular circumstances, have the right to a judge, have the right to a hearing outside of just the police, and then even on expedited process, you still have the right to be told that you're deportable and have the right to challenge it somehow. Donald Trump was robbing the immigrants of the right to challenge their designation as deportable, which also infringes on citizens' constitutional rights, because if you're rounding people up, you're not giving them the ability to prove that they're not an illegal immigrant, then how do we know that we're just getting rid of illegal immigrants?
You think that people that are legal citizens are getting deported?
I don't know if we have a case of citizens being deported. I know we have cases of citizens being rounded up by ICE, but I don't know if they actually ended up getting deported. But it's just illustrating the fact that if we're not giving the ability for these people to challenge their deportability, then who's to say that that doesn't end up creeping into citizenship? Like, it's a bad precedent to set, you know?
I don't think that any citizens have been deported. I haven't. I don't think that's what's going on. But
no, not right now.
So
okay, so all I'm saying,
what I'm getting at is I think it's pretty black and white that if you're not a U.S. citizen, and if you came from Mexico and you're not a U.S. citizen, or South America, okay, you're going back right now. You know what I mean?
That's not black and white though. So, like, there's even different processes by which we deport somebody. Like, if you say that somebody is entitled to regular or expedited deportation, but they're actually entitled to regular deportation proceedings, then that's a violation of their due process rights. Like, if you try and get somebody out of the country as quickly as possible without affording them the rights that they're given through acts of Congress, then that's a violation of their rights.
Yeah, I'd have to agree to a point, but
so that's what I'm saying, is that Donald Trump is violating these people's rights. And it also doesn't help that, in violating these people's rights, he's sending them to a prison in El Salvador where they're being tortured.
I can't say we can really control what's going on there or why that's happening.
We can control them being sent there, right? Like, we have an agreement with the head of El Salvador saying that we're sending them to that particular prison where they're being tortured.
Right, but why is that happening there? You know what I mean? It's like we can't police everything that's happening everywhere, and that's terrible to say.
But I mean, if I send my kid to a daycare and I know that daycare is gonna punch him if he misbehaves, you would say that, like, why the fuck is the parent sending him to that daycare, right?
But it's not like, I see what you're saying, and I would agree with what you're saying, that why would a parent? But it's like, this kid keeps coming into my house, and I'm going to take him to this daycare where he can be taken care of, or, in quotations, taken care of, not my problem. I want him gone. He's costing me money. He's violated my rules or laws, this is where you go. What happens from there? Not my problem.
Well,
You know,
okay. So
you've violated.
even within this example,
You know,
like if there's a kid that's coming into your house and it's he's trespassing, do you think you would have the right to torture them?
no, but I don't think. I think that's wrong.
Sure. Yeah. Sure.
But at the
So
same time,
I'm glad you agree.
I think that's
I'm
wrong.
glad you
Obviously, I
agree.
don't think that's okay in any in
So
well, I
so
should
the
say
president,
yeah,
we
yeah.
shouldn't be sending them to a prison where we know they're being tortured or that has reports of torturing their inmates. That's what I'm saying.
Right. But is that 100%? Is that a fact?
So I mean, there's watchdog organizations within El Salvador that have reported through multiple testimonies from the inmates as well as just general reports from, I think, prison guards saying that the prison guards were torturing the inmates in Secot. That was even before we were sending them there. And now one of the people that we deported to Secot reported being tortured in ways that were detailed in that prior report.
Yeah. But at the same time, look at it like this. There's some pretty terrible shit that happens in American prisons. Can you agree?
Yeah, sure. But I mean,
So should we send people that should be going to prison? So we just, oh shit, let's not send them to prison because bad stuff's gonna happen.
I don't have a problem with holding these people. I don't mind detaining certain people. That's not my problem. The problem is that we're sending them to a prison that we know that people get tortured at. So I mean, and I would say the same thing. Like if we were imprisoning people and the state knew that prisoners were being tortured by the guards and they were sending people to that prison anyway, I would say that's absolutely immoral, because the punishment for illegal immigration is not torture, in the same way that like the punishment for theft is not torture. Like we shouldn't be sending people to places where we know they will be tortured.
Correct, and I agree with you, but how much can we do? You know what I mean?
We could send them literally anywhere else. Or we could just slow down some of the deportations as well. But
then that's kind of goes against the whole point of removing these people that are costing you money or taking away from, your economy.
I would reject that these people are taking away from the economy, but even if we grant that, the answer isn't to do everything so quick that we incidentally send people to a prison where we know they're going to be tortured. That's never going to be. I would say slow down on the deportations. You don't need to do everything expeditedly.
Yeah, I think there's pros and cons to either or. I don't think I don't think deporting anybody's a winning game in anybody's favor. You know what I mean? I think it's.
Sure, but I mean, I think the problem is that you're seeing it black and white as either it's good or it's bad. I'm saying that at the bare minimum, we shouldn't be sending people who are robbed of their due process rights to a prison in El Salvador where they're being tortured and where we knew inmates would be tortured. I feel like that's a very, very easy thing to say.
I see where you're coming from. I do understand what you're saying, but it sucks.
Do you disagree?
Yes and no. I feel like what are you gonna do? You know what I mean?
Would you say the same thing if? So let's say that there's a federal prison. We know that the prison guards are torturing all of the inmates that we send there, and we arrest somebody and send them straight to that prison without a trial. Would you say, oh well, what are you gonna do? Like, would you say that?
No, I would say that should be a problem that should be solved.
Do you think that?
I should say.
Do you think that the people
nobody should be tortured anywhere?
Do you think that the people who sent them to that prison should be held accountable for that?
No, I feel like the people that are torturing other people
really
should be held accountable for that. Yeah.
You don't think the people who? So if I
let's
knew,
go back. Let's go back to what you said about sending your kid to a daycare. Say your kid gets punched in the face. Should you be held accountable?
So okay, wait, hold on.
Somebody else's action.
The hypothetical that I gave is that you're sending your child to a daycare where you know that the people who are watching your children will end up abusing them, and you send them to that daycare anyway, I would say absolutely punish the parent that sent him to that daycare. And that's what the US law agrees with. That would absolutely fall under neglect.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like where these people are being sent should be more professional, or if there's problems, they should be taken care of immediately. But I don't
why
think
aren't you
that
willing to
we should
say
just,
that?
let's,
Why aren't you willing to say that the people who sent them to a torture camp that they knew was a torture camp should be held accountable for doing that?
because is it a torture camp or is it a prison?
It's a prison in which the guards torture the inmates, and in which somebody with no criminal record was sent.
But I feel like you could say that about any American prison too, though.
No, you can't.
You know what I would say that some pretty terrible things happen in every American prison, so you know what I mean? Personally, that's what I think.
No,
I'm not right about it, and I know I'm not right about it, but who is?
Okay.
What's right? Like I said, I think it's a losing game, truthfully. It's like, do you pick bad or do you pick terrible? I don't know.
In that case,
right.
why would you not immediately pick bad over terrible?
No, is what I'm saying is what's happening is bad. Yeah, that sucks, but the problem is gone. It's not your problem anymore. So
no, you sent them to the place where they would be tortured. That is your problem. Like I said, in the hypothetical that I gave you, that's neglect.
That's also, in my opinion, that's questionable.
Really? If a parent willingly sent their kid to a daycare where they knew they would be tortured?
What I'm saying is, do you think every person that's getting sent there is getting tortured? Maybe there's been cases of it. Yeah.
I mean,
okay,
I would just
agree
encourage you. I would encourage you, like, if you have any free time, just look up the conditions of CCOT in El Salvador. You would see that the people who are being sent there, in some cases with no criminal record, have a pretty high likelihood of being tortured. I mean, like, in the one case, they were describing people, like, you know how whenever you go to prison, you need to be dressed down and then you have to dress into the prison garb? There was a report that if they weren't dressed within 5 minutes, they would start being beaten by the guards.
Yeah, that's pretty terrible.
And you're sending people with no criminal record there.
But do they really have, I mean, it's fucked up. I'll say that. It's fucked up. No matter how you look at it or how you want to interpret it or look at it or think about it, it's messed up. I do agree with you on that.
It's like, it's disgusting.
I'm not going to sit here. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that, oh, who cares? Who gives a shit? That's not wrong at all. But I'm going to sit here and tell you, like,
it kind of feels like it kind of feels like if we were trying somebody who was who was sending their child to the daycare where they knew their child would be abused, and they're standing on the on the thing, and you're a juror. It kind of feels like all you're saying is like, yeah, that was fucked up, and then they're like, okay, well you find her guilty, and you're like, no, probably not. I mean, like, a lot of fucked up stuff happens. Like, that's kind of what, like, the vibe that I'm getting from you right now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. At the same time, can you control everything that's not in your control?
It
the prison in El Salvador.
It was in the U.S.'s control to send him to the prison in El Salvador. That was a deal that the U.S. made with the president of El Salvador.
Right,
but like, how much of that is happening?
Right.
Yeah, we could wrap it up. All right. Well,
I don't know. I think I think you're looking at bad versus bad. So, like I said, I don't think it's a winning.
All right. Well, game. Cole, I appreciate you coming up and chatting.
Yep. So, yeah. Well, I guess have a good day. So.
Yep. You too, buddy. I don't know.
Probably restart.
I don't even know what to say to.
I mean, it was just going in circles. I mean, like, there was nothing really being debated at all. It was just like, well, that's happening, but what are we gonna do? Well, this is what we're
I
gonna do.
don't know
Okay,
how
but, like, what are
to.
we gonna do? It's like, okay, at some point we just gotta give it up.
I don't know how to instill empathy in people.
I mean, you just can't. If they're not gonna reply by like the second or third time that you ask them, you just gotta
Yeah, but like
leave it.
what's worse? The idea that like the idea of running in circles with somebody that is like kind of timid on it, or just accepting the fact that some people have no empathy and are fine with something like that. That's crazy. I don't know. I felt like there may have been some leeway if I was able to drill down a little harder, but that's okay.
But it was at the drilling point of like for like last 30 minutes of that guy. So, all right, I'm gonna restart real quick. So
Okay.
I'll
I'll
be
be
back.
back. I love you.